Hello and welcome to tonight's Academy chat. Tonight we'll be talking with a parent of a student who went to the Spanish Academy in Salamanca. Before we kick things off, just a few housekeeping items. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A pane. If you click on that, you can type a question in. We will have time reserved at the end of our interview, after the interview, for the Q&A, but please feel free to ask questions at any point. As possible, I will ask those questions of Tyana if they sort of make sense, and if they don't, we'll just save them for the end, and we'll try to make sure we get them all covered. One other thing about questions, if I don't have the opportunity to answer your question for some reason, please know that every question is really important to us, and we'll make sure to follow up with an answer offline, even if we don't get the chance to answer tonight. So the structure of tonight's Academy chat, we'll be doing an interview for 15 minutes, and then we'll transition to the Q&A. We will stick to our timeline. We'll only be 30 minutes. We know everyone's busy, and we want to respect your time. So first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Zach Dukowitz. I'm a marketing coordinator here at the Academies. I've worked here for a little over 4 years in various roles related to marketing. And one thing among several that I share in common with Tyana is that I've actually been to the Salamanca site, and I've gotten to see it in person as a chaperone for the Academies 2 years ago. I didn't have the good fortune of meeting Tyana's son, but it was pretty cool to be there and see the site. So I'll hand things off to Tyana. Could you introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the interview itself?
Sure. So my name is Tyana Kurtz, and my son Zachary, who is now in the 9th grade, attended the Salamanca program last summer as a rising 9th grader. We live in the New York area, and it was an amazing experience for him.
Thanks so much. And thanks again for taking the time to be here.
Absolutely, no problem.
So yeah, let's dive right in. Can you give us some background? First of all, just what brought you to be looking for a summer language program for your son in the first place?
Sure. So Zachary is very passionate about language, Spanish in particular, at this time. He had started taking Spanish in the 2nd grade, and by the time he was in middle school, was taking more advanced classes with the teachers, primarily speaking Spanish during class. He had spent some time in Costa Rica the prior summer, but not in any form of an immersion program. But he did have a chance to do some speaking, and really kept expressing a desire to become fluent. And we had a conversation at home, one evening where we discussed the fact that to become fluent, you really need to immerse yourself. And he has a love of travel, a love of cultural immersion, and so decided that he really wanted to find, a Spanish immersion program in Spain that would force him to improve on his, conversation skills and fluency.
Thank you so much. And can you tell us, how did you first find us? How did you first learn about the Language Academy?
So ironically, I actually initially just went online and started Googling immersion, Spanish immersion programs for teens. And the first thing that popped up was the Middlebury Academy's programs, and being an alum of Middlebury College, it seemed somewhat fortuitous that was the program that jumped in front of me. And so that was really the first introduction. And then the more I explored the program, it just seemed to be the right fit for what we were looking for and what Zachary was looking for.
Thanks for giving us a little bit of that background. And to dive even deeper, the Salamanca Academy is unique in that it's our only homestay academy that we have. Can you tell us a little bit about why Zachary chose to go to Salamanca specifically?
Certainly. So, once we found the Middlebury Academy's programs, and learned that there were really three options. He could have, done the program in the U.S. in Vermont. There was Salamanca, and there was the program in Granada. Right away, we basically ruled out Vermont because he really wanted to be in Spain, and we were supportive of that. And then collectively, my husband, myself, and Zachary all agreed that given his age and that he was going to be at the younger end of the spectrum, that the homestay component was an important component and an experience we really felt strongly that he should have. And he fully agreed. And he did his own research on the two cities. We had actually been to Spain and been to Granada, so he had seen that, and he also wanted to, try a new location. And it just seemed like the right fit for him for last summer.
Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, it's definitely just a helpful insight that the homestay could help be a bridge for those who are intrigued by study abroad, but maybe young or maybe intimidated by the idea. I mean, it's intimidating for all of us. I did it as an adult and found it intimidating, but having the homestay is a way to sort of bridge into that experience. I have a quick aside. I was negligent at the beginning. I want to make sure everyone knows at the very end of our presentation tonight, we'll be sharing some news about a flash sale that we're offering for folks just for the next 3 days. So if you make sure to stick around to the end, we actually have the biggest number of people in attendance right now that we've ever had in an Academy chat, which is very exciting. I just want to encourage folks to stay till the end, and we'll be sharing a promotional code that will get you a discount if you do choose to enroll. So I just wanted to mention that. Sorry about the aside. But Tyana, to get back to Salamanca and Zachary's experience, can you share with us a little about the sort of details of the living situation in Salamanca? Did Zachary have his own room? What was his experience like doing a homestay? Because I think for a lot of us, it's something we've never done and never thought about doing. So anything you can speak to about that would be appreciated.
Sure. So Zachary lived with a couple. They had older children who no longer lived in the home. It was an apartment environment. He had his own room, and another boy on the program also had his own room. So one thing that was nice was the two of them were both living with this particular family. The couple was lovely. And I think the one thing that, is important to understand, his home, like I think the majority of the homes, did not have air conditioning. So, that was something that they did have to adapt to and get fans. But, he really felt like they, got to know this couple very well. They spend time with them, on the weekends, and of course having meals together. But he was very comfortable in the home, and what basically most of the kids, they lived within relative close proximity to one another, and then they would sort of meet up to go to and from school. So it was very comfortable, and he had really no complaints.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And can you tell us, as a parent, how often did you get to communicate with Zachary, and what was communication like? I mean, I know that's top of mind for a lot of parents, given it might be the first time their child's away, and especially abroad and away for this long. So yeah, anything you could say about communication?
Sure. So, I mean, Zachary, I think like most of the kids did have a cell phone. We went into it really trying to stick to the policy of the program and encouraging him to communicate with us. I think it was twice a week. I will say we also did all of our communication through WhatsApp. That was just the way our family chose to do it. I think it worked really well. And what really ended up happening was, I think initially we spoke to him more often. He would often just call us to touch base, right before he went to bed, which was, earlier in the day for us, and just to say hi. And then quite honestly, as the program went on, we heard less and less from him. I think he was so engaged and so involved. He had less of a reason to call us, and usually was probably just ready, to go to sleep, since the days tend to be a bit longer there with the culture and the fact that dinner and everything happens much later. So I think, they discourage the kids, obviously, during the day. They're not using their phone. They're immersing themselves in language, and they don't necessarily want them on their phones speaking English all the time. But it really did. It worked out just fine, and I think he felt he had the ability to get in touch with us when he needed to and wanted to.
And what you're describing is a pretty typical arc for an academy student, that the first week they might be in a lot of communication, and then as they become more comfortable and more comfortable speaking as well, more comfortable socially, maybe a little less, fewer calls home, but of course the possibility is always there. And on a similar note, it's a common thing really for anyone who places themselves in an immersion environment to face challenges and struggles. And yeah, I'm wondering if you can speak to any struggles that your son faced while going through this experience, or any challenges, and what that was like for you as a parent.
Sure. So Zachary went, I would say, alone, in the sense that he didn't know any of the other kids when he started the program. And I think the first few days were definitely a bit challenging from a number of vantage points. First and foremost, I mean, the students are really, told, and they sign a contract to adhere to the language, which means, in addition, talking to, if you have another student from the program living in the same home with you, talking to them in Spanish as well. And so I think initially that was hard. It was hard to, turn that on and speak Spanish, all the time. And then especially his host parents did not speak English. And so, navigating that in the beginning and having the conversation over the meals was initially challenging. Also, I think for him, it was quite warm in Spain last summer. And the first few nights, he just had a hard time sleeping because he was used to air conditioning. They didn't have air conditioning. And so it was something he had to get used to. And so I think he just wasn't sleeping great those first few nights. And so that took a little while to sort of settle in. But, once everything got underway, they were in their classes, they got into their routine, they, got to know one another. It sort of all just, all of sort of whatever, the stress or the anxieties sort of disappeared. And he would say it was the best summer, of his life, and certainly came out of it having, learned a tremendous amount, both from a language standpoint, but also just from a growth standpoint in general.
Yeah, and on that same note, could you share maybe some of the highlights for him, some of the things that, he enjoyed the most, or some of his favorite parts about the experience, or about things he did while he was in Salamanca?
Sure. I think, in terms of the day-to-day, he definitely loved the structure. He loved that while the morning was more, let's call it, classroom environment, it was not like his Spanish classes at home, which were more grammar-based, maybe more like rote learning. It was very conversational, very cultural-based, and a lot of interactive, activities. So the kids weren't just like sitting, in a classroom for several hours. That then transitioned in the afternoon. He loved that they had choices of activities. They could play sports. They could take a Latin dance class. They could go out on a bike ride and do an excursion through Salamanca. There were so many different choices. And I think that was really nice, both from a social standpoint, but also from a learning standpoint, and being able to, apply what he was learning out in the community. He loved the fact that he realized when he got there that not every night was dinner with your host family. I think he went in thinking that every single night he was going to have to be home, but what became apparent was there were evening activities planned. They did karaoke one night. They went out for tapas one night. And there were nights when, with appropriate supervision, the kids really could go out with friends. They went to see movies in Spanish, out for tapas. They went for a night tour of the cathedral in Salamanca. And so there was a level and a degree of independence that he really enjoyed and he really appreciated. And of course, the trips they took on the weekends were great. He loves to travel. He loves to explore. So I think, there was a good range of activity and cultural immersion, as well as just, language and speaking immersion.
And yeah, by the end, I'm curious, because, you've told us he already had been studying Spanish and he traveled some in Spanish speaking countries and areas. Could you see a difference in his Spanish abilities?
So for us, there was a huge difference. I think he's a strong language student. He has a good ear and he is not afraid to try and speak. But I would say at this point he is fully conversant in Spanish. I don't know if fluency, is the word. He still obviously has vocabulary that he needs to build, but by way of example, we met him in Madrid at the airport, and he went up to order something and get something and had a full exchange in Spanish with the salesperson, who didn't even think to speak English to him and practically just looked at me and spoke English. So, it was amazing to see his ability. And since we've been home, I mean, he still takes Spanish in school and they speak in class all the time. But I do know that when he's around people who speak the language, he's able to just jump right in and have a dialogue and have a conversation with them. And so definitely had a huge impact on both his, comfort and ability. And he said it the best himself. He said by the end, he no longer was translating in his head, that it was coming out naturally. And so I think that was the impact of having that month of true immersion.
That's pretty incredible. I've been studying Spanish for a decade and I still feel like I'm translating in my head a lot of the time. So that's a pretty special place to get to. That's pretty awesome. I have one more question that's part of the formal interview, I'll call it, but then we're going to transfer over to the Q&A and really let other parents and other students who might be on ask you questions through the chat pane. I do want to encourage folks to hop into the Q&A pane and ask questions. You can also hop into, there's a chat pane. You can use either one. I'll see them both. So if you do have any questions, please don't be shy. Please feel free to hop in now. But we'll get to that in just a moment. My last question that's part of the interview, Tyana, is if you could just share any advice for other parents who are considering this experience, any advice for the students as well who might be on?
Sure. I mean, I think as a parent, in part, you have to know your child, right? And you have to, know going in that the program, they really want kids who are ready and prepared to fully immerse themselves. And they take it very seriously. And I think the kids in the program also take it very seriously. And that's why they gain so much out of it. I think, it's not easy the first few days. And so kids should be prepared for that. And then just understanding that there just are cultural differences, right? The no air conditioning. Another thing that Zachary discovered was, breakfast in Spain is it's really light. It's like a pastry and a little jam and something else. And then they had sort of this mid-morning, snack or meal. And, at first he thought that was, strange. Why are they having so little when they first wake up? But you just have to adapt to their culture, their way of life, and be able to know that even if those first few days are challenging, that will pass.
Thank you so much. I know I'm sure we have a lot of parents on right now who are considering, but perhaps apprehensive. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot to wrap your head around, having your child travel across the ocean and take 4 weeks immersed in another language in another country. So I really appreciate you speaking from your experience. We have a few questions that I'm going to answer because they're more sort of nuts and bolts, and then I think a few questions for Tyana. So the first question we have, is this type of immersion similar to the Granada program? So all of our language academies follow the same pedagogy, where students take a pledge at the beginning to stay in language, and they take this pledge along with the faculty, the staff. So everyone is committing to stay in language for the full duration of the program. So in that sense, Salamanca, Granada are exactly the same pedagogically. The big difference between the two sites is that Salamanca is a homestay, so students are living with a family there in the city, and they do have extra opportunities to speak to those native speakers. That being said, in Granada, or really in any other site that we operate, whether it's domestic or abroad, students are doing activities at night and doing activities with their classmates and with other staff and faculty in the same hours that a student in Salamanca would be with a host family. So the opportunities to learn aren't necessarily more, but they are different in the sense that students are there with native speakers. And as Tyana said, they have a little more social support because they have sort of a built-in family where they're staying. So those are the big differences between Granada, Salamanca, and that really Salamanca, as we said at the beginning, is unique among all of our academies. It's the only homestay that we offer. And then we have another question. Are the academies, the language programs, appropriate for beginners? The answer is that absolutely. The domestic academies are the best fit for beginners, but we accept students who have no language ability at all, who are just starting out, and that's absolutely fine. And for those students who really haven't studied the language at all, we have reasonable expectations about the language pledge. So if they do need to use a little bit of English at the beginning, really it's up to the student's comfort level, because it could be incredibly intense to be attempting to speak a language that you don't know at all. It's up to the comfort level. It's up to really each individual student, but we can accommodate beginner speakers, absolutely. The study abroad sites, Salamanca, Granada, Nantes, and Beijing, are better suited for students who've already studied the language. So yeah, that's the answer about beginning speakers, but we do take beginning speakers for sure. And then here's the question, Tyana, if you could address this. When your son called home, I'm assuming you guys weren't speaking Spanish the whole time, right? Were you speaking in English, or was he allowed to speak in English when he called you?
Yeah, so he was allowed to speak English when he called us, and my understanding is all the kids, unless their parents speak Spanish, were speaking English when they called us. I will say what was impressive though was that if his host mother or his housemate started speaking to him while he was on the phone, he would speak back to them in Spanish. So it was fun. It was fun to hear that, which happened on occasion. And I do think, to the pledge, I do know there were one or two, I think it might have been the karaoke night, where they let all the kids speak English because of all the songs were in English. So I think that was one night where they went off the contract.
Yeah. And to the same point, I mean, having, spoken with a lot of other folks who help run the academies, the idea of the pledge is not to be punitive, but to have everyone having a shared language experience. So if there's an emergency or if there's a moment where the pledge needs to be lifted, it could be for a fun reason like you just gave. It's not a draconian thing. It's a spirit that we are all here to do our very best to stay immersed. But if something comes up that requires English, or if a student is just really homesick, which occasionally can happen, the use of the pledge is always reasonably applied, is important to say. A few other nuts and bolts type questions. Someone's asking if there's a placement test. So yes, there is a placement test. Once a student applies and begins the enrollment process, they will take the test and be placed appropriately. And then we had another question about whether a student might be able to go on a run every morning. I actually don't know off the top of my head if they could run in the morning, but I know that students have activity times every day, and running 2 to 4 miles is absolutely something that could be fit into the day. There's no problem if a student has an exercise regimen or something that they want to keep up with during those 4 weeks. There should be ample time for that. Those are all the questions that we have right now. If you do have questions, please feel free to hop in. Let's go ahead and share it. Yeah. So while we're waiting on any other questions, I want to go ahead and share this with you. I know I mentioned this in the middle of the interview with Tyana. So right now, only the folks who are on this chat are getting to see this. We're going to launch this officially tomorrow, but we are starting a flash sale. So if you enroll anytime between now and Monday at 11:59, so by the end of the day Monday, you can get an additional $500 off the cost of enrollment. So currently, students already get $500 off. That's just the period of enrollment that we're in. So with this flash sale, you would get a full amount of $1,000 off. So we're offering an additional $500 off. It's really important to get the $500 off to use this code Flash Academy 2020 that's on the screen, or I'm sorry, Flash Academy 20. If you want to take a screenshot of this, please do, or jot this down. But that's the code you'll use when checking out, when enrolling, to get that additional $500. So a total of $1,000 off the cost of tuition. This applies to any academy that you're interested in joining. It could be domestic, could be abroad, it could be Salamanca, etc. One last thing to say is that Salamanca specifically is almost full. It is our most popular study abroad location. So if you're interested in Salamanca, I believe there's only 4 spots left. So I just want to share that. It looks like we don't have any more questions, and we're actually right up here on the half hour. So this is a good moment to close things out. Does anyone need to see that code again, though? Please chat if you do. All right, great. Well, Tyana, I just want to thank you so very much. Oh, you know what? We do have 2 more questions. I'm going to go ahead and answer these real quick. So question about the placement test. So the placement test isn't given on a particular date. It's given really up to the child to take. So it's something that you do as part of the enrollment, but it doesn't have to happen on a specific date. So as you start the enrollment process, you can take that placement test whenever you like.
Yeah, Zach, just
yes.
in regards to that, I mean, maybe I can just share. The placement test is all online. It does take a little bit of time, so you do have to allow for that. And I would just say one thing to note, though, Zachary got there and he felt like his class was a little easier than, he wanted it. And, they sorted that all out there, and he ended up, in a class that was appropriate, and it all worked out. So I wouldn't view the placement test as the be all end all. It's fluid, and they want to make sure that all kids are, appropriately placed and, in the right level once they're there. They then do have the opportunity to take the test at the end. Typically, I think they try to get that done in Salamanca just so that there's a comparative measure to see where they are when they leave vis-a-vis when they arrived. In our case, he took it when he got home, but that was just because they were doing something else that day.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for speaking. You're definitely closer to the pulse of things when it comes to, I've never actually taken the placement test. So we're having some safety questions. So we're having a parent ask if the program is safe for girls. The program, any program that we offer, domestic, abroad, Salamanca, you name it, we've never had a safety related incident. So it is absolutely safe for girls. We do have female chaperones. Many of our teachers are women. Many of our faculty, our program managers are women. So yeah, I think we demographically have more young women than young men enroll every summer. I believe it's about 60-40, but that's just off the top of my head. So I think I'm going to leave it there. If your question didn't get answered, please follow up with us via email using the email that you see on the screen, and we'll be sure to answer every single question you have. But please take a screenshot or jot that email down. That is our enrollment manager's email, and we monitor it very diligently. So if you do have follow-up questions, if you get off of this and you have more questions, we know it's a really big decision. We don't expect you to necessarily go take that promo code and apply right now. We know that you still have research you need to do. So please feel free to reach out to us. Tyana, I just want to thank you so very much for taking the time to be with us tonight. Thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, that's a wrap for tonight, folks, but we hope to see you this summer, and take care, everyone. Thanks for attending.